All right, here we are in the first tutorial looking at some techniques and workflows for different rendering styles. This one, I guess we've called a flat render, collage render. One of the nice things about this style that we'll see is that you don't need to model a lot of detail. A lot of this, the kind of level of interest comes from what you can do in Photoshop. And what we're going to be looking at is how V-Ray can help us pretty quickly and easily set up images that are very useful in Photoshop, whether it's kind of getting us started on mapping out some of the textures or giving us the channels that we can then use to isolate and mask in Photoshop. So essentially what we're going to try and do, and you'll have to bear with me, I'll be stumbling around a little bit. Recording this, and we can obviously talk about it directly over Zoom and in my office hours. But what we're going to do is quickly run through some basics of kind of setting up a render scene, a lot of which many of you probably already know or familiar with. And then we're going to try and recreate this image. This is a collage by Office. Cursing here is David Van Severin for a project I think they call Office 171. So I've done a very basic kind of model of the building here. We're going to be trying to recreate this. I think it's a render up the middle here. Yeah, and then we'll go through. I'll probably break the videos up into a couple chunks so that you can feel free to skip over things you may already know. I've tried to include files so that you can follow it at any stage. And also, I'll just break it up so that I don't lose anybody with my rambling. So to start, I'm sure you already know it's usually most useful to kind of just have the geometry or the space that you're going to be rendering. We don't need the entire building. We're looking at rendering something that's more or less around this view. So we've only kept the things that we need for the scene. And next, something that you're probably familiar with that I've already gone ahead and done is just breaking down once you've had an idea of what materials might go where, or what the surfaces in your scene are going to be. You'll want to organize those by layer. An easy way to do that, obviously, is kind of layers that represent those materials, and then breaking down your model and assigning the different visible surfaces to those materials, and those can be very simplified kind of surfaces that you're only seeing head on, or they can be solids. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. So as I've said, these have already been kind of organized, and the next thing that, again, likely already done, but that's necessary before you can start rendering, is to set up the camera and then save the view. And for that, I like to have a kind of view open that will be my render scene, maybe just another perspective view so that we can look around and help assign materials and things, and then we'll make use of the orthographic views as well. So when you're in the view that's going to become your render, you can hit F6 to show the camera, or you can use the command camera and show. What that does is it'll show you, you can see here, this is the camera and the kind of target, and you can move it around using the gumball or however you like in these other views. And the reason that's a good way to do it is that it can kind of just make it a lot easier to set up the scene in a very precise way. One good example of that is this line here, where I think is at 5'9", so it's good to set the camera somewhere around the height of human eye, so between 5 and 6 feet, let's say. And so you can use the orthographic view to make sure you're in that range, and you can use the top view to make sure you're centered, and you can do that by snapping to lines or whatever, and you do have to do that. But for this, I'm just kind of quickly running through it because I've already saved a view that we'll be using. But anyway, so once you've set up a view, let's say you like this view here, you're going to want to save it. Again, I'm sorry if I'm repeating things you already know, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, you use the command named view. That'll pull up a window. I have it dragged down beside layers. Normally it's just a kind of standalone window, and you can save that view, and that makes sure that you can always go back to that exact same view, as you're re-rendering a scene, so that you don't ever go off. Another useful thing to know is, especially when you're, I didn't mention yet, but obviously you can change the lens length here in Rhino in the Properties tab. Generally, somewhere between 20 and 35 is kind of a nice range that is a bit closer to what we see with our eyes. Let's use 24, for example. But as you start to use these different lens lengths, there is some distortion that happens, and one way to help keep the vertical lines vertical is to look at the camera Z location and the target Z location and make sure they're the same, meaning that the camera is at the same kind of position as, or height at least, as the target. And that's obviously if you're trying to create a straight-on image, and which in this case we are. So we'll just, for example, copy that value down to the target. It can be a bit finicky. There we go. So that straightens it out. But yeah, so I have already saved a view. You should all have it. And you can just double click it, and it'll bring you into that view, rendered camera. And that's what we'll use as we render this out and move it into Photoshop. I think I'll break up the video here, again, just so I don't lose anybody, and then I'll come back in, and what we'll start doing is assigning the materials and looking at a couple different ways we can use V-Ray to map out materials and kind of get the bones that we need to start creating that image in Photoshop. So I'll just close this and I'll open up another one.